The courtroom was packed, the tension thicker than the morning fog outside. Reporters jostled for camera angles, and the audience sat in hushed anticipation. In the middle of it all stood Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, not on a red carpet, not on a movie set, but in a defendant's chair. The man who had once represented strength, hope, and philanthropy now faced accusations of embezzlement tied to his widely publicized charity foundation. Cameras had captured the arrival of every major witness. Journalists speculated endlessly about whether this would be a career-ending scandal or a misunderstood act of goodwill. But Dwayne's expression betrayed nothing. He sat calmly in a tailored gray suit, eyes scanning the courtroom like a general on the battlefield. Opposite him sat Judge Carlton W. Reeves, known for his razor-sharp intellect and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He eyed Dwayne with professional distance, though a flicker of curiosity betrayed his otherwise stoic demeanor. The Rock's presence alone demanded attention, but would it be enough to overshadow the weight of the evidence? The prosecutor, a young but relentless figure named Rachel Kim, wasted no time launching into the opening argument. Her tone was sharp, her words deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about fame. It is not about charisma. It is about trust, and what happens when the people we trust most betray that bond." The courtroom remained silent, her words hanging in the air like thunderclouds. Dwayne's legal team exchanged glances. They had rehearsed for every angle, every possibility. But even they couldn't predict how the public would react to what was about to unfold. Then came the exhibit. Documents, transfers, emails, on the surface, a web of financial redirections that painted Dwayne in a deeply unfavorable light. Gasps echoed. Eyebrows rose. Was this truly the same man who'd lifted hurricane victims onto his back and carried supplies into flood zones? Yet as the prosecution rested its opening, Dwayne rose, not to speak but simply to stand. His silence drew every eye. And that's when the whisper started. Not from him but from the gallery. A child's voice. "He helped us when no one did." Judge Reeves banged the gavel. Order in the court. But the whisper had done its damage. The courtroom was no longer looking at a villain. They were searching, wondering if perhaps they'd misjudged a man they thought they knew. And Dwayne? He simply sat back down, not a word spoken, letting silence say everything. Rachel Kim wasn't easily rattled. Fresh out of Harvard Law but already known for her meticulous preparation, she returned to the stand the next morning ready to crush the growing emotional undercurrent building in Dwayne Johnson's favor. She had seen it happen before, celebrity defendants leaning on their fame to deflect from hard evidence. This time she vowed the facts would prevail. Judge Reeves entered the room with the solemn grace he was known for. The courtroom rose. Cameras zoomed in. Dwayne sat poised, unshaken, his massive frame composed but unreadable. He wore the same suit, same expressionless calm. But something had changed. That whisper from the gallery had triggered a shift, a soft rebellion against the prosecution's neatly crafted narrative. "Your Honor," Rachel began, her voice razor-sharp, "today we will demonstrate not only Mr. Johnson's personal oversight in the alleged fraud, but also his deliberate approval of fund misdirection." She motioned to the first witness, the foundation's former financial officer, Gerald Lane. Lane looked nervous. His hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Johnson was informed multiple times," he said, "but he trusted people too easily." Rachel pressed harder. "So you're saying he knowingly ignored these red flags?" There was a pause. "Not knowingly," Lane admitted, "but his signature was there." Rachel faltered for a millisecond. It wasn't the smoking gun she had hoped for. She pivoted to Exhibit C, a digital trail showing money moved from disaster relief accounts to consulting services. Again gasps. Judge Reeves leaned forward. "Counselor, please clarify the dates of these transfers." Rachel clicked her remote. The dates appeared. One transfer stood out. The same week Dwayne had been photographed personally delivering water in Honduras. The defense team rose immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Context is being manipulated. That week Mr. Johnson covered logistics costs personally, costs the foundation later reimbursed." Rachel's confidence began to crack. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Noted," he said, scribbling something on his notepad. But it wasn't over. Rachel turned, attempting to recover the moment. "Intent isn't erased by good deeds." Then Dwayne stood. "I'd like to testify," he said, voice even, deep, unwavering. A hush fell over the room. Judge Reeves tilted his head. "Are you certain, Mr. Johnson?" Dwayne nodded. I owe it to everyone who believed in me. In that instant, the court became still, not for a spectacle, not for a celebrity, but for a man determined to be heard no matter the cost. And with that declaration, the courtroom transformed from a theater of judgment into a stage of truth. The hush in the courtroom was more profound than silence. It was reverence, anticipation, disbelief. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, one of the most recognized figures in the world, had just volunteered to take the stand. Not through PR channels, not filtered through statements, but directly under oath. Judge Reeves leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Mr. Johnson, you understand you are not required to testify. Anything you say may be used." "I understand, Your Honor," Dwayne said calmly. "And I still want to speak." The bailiff escorted him to the witness chair. Cameras clicked. Journalists scribbled frantically. Every eye locked onto the towering man who now sat not as a star, not as a symbol, but as a citizen, subject to the same laws as anyone else. Rachel Kim adjusted her blazer, masking her surprise. This wasn't in the script. She knew celebrity testimonies were unpredictable, volatile, and devastatingly effective. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her tone clipped, "you claim to have been unaware of the misappropriated funds. Is that your sworn statement?" "I never touched a cent," Dwayne replied. "Every decision I made was for those families we were trying to help." Rachel pressed on. "And yet, your signature appears on documents authorizing the payments in question." He looked at the screen as the documents were displayed. "I signed off on dozens of expenditures every week," he said, "but I trusted our internal team to verify. That was my mistake, trust without audit." The judge took note. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to negligence?" "I admit to loyalty," Dwayne answered. "To people I thought had integrity." The room tensed. This wasn't a denial, it was an emotional revelation. One that shifted the framing of the entire trial. Rachel tried to pivot. "What about the luxury travel expenses billed to the foundation?" Dwayne nodded. "My own card. Every flight. Every room. Every bottle of water I handed out was paid from my personal account. The foundation reimbursed me later, yes, but that was policy, not deception." Gasp. Even the jury flinched. Judge Reeves glanced toward the defense. "Any objection?" "No, Your Honor," Dwayne's attorney said. "We'd like to submit Mr. Johnson's financial records into evidence." Rachel looked momentarily cornered. The power had shifted, and the court felt it. But she had one last card to play. "Mr. Johnson," she said slowly, "why didn't you speak up sooner?" He paused. "I thought if I stayed quiet, the truth would speak for itself," he said, voice steady. "But I realize now, sometimes silence is seen as guilt." He turned to the jury. "So here I am. Not because I'm trying to win fans, but because I need you to see the man behind the headlines." And for a brief moment, the courtroom became still once more, not for legal strategy, not for drama, but for something far rarer, humanity. Rachel Kim sat back in her chair, her jaw set tighter than ever. The jury was shaken, and the defense had gained traction. Judge Reeves, ever the pillar of neutrality, adjusted his glasses but made no comment. His silence said enough. Dwayne Johnson's testimony had weight. But Rachel wasn't done. She rose, her stilettos clicking against the marble floor, each step deliberate. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Jasmine Carver to the stand." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Dwayne's face barely flinched, but his shoulders tensed. Jasmine wasn't just a former employee, she had been his confidant. And her name hadn't appeared on any of the pretrial witness lists. The courtroom doors opened and Jasmine entered slowly. Slender, poised, and unreadable, she walked with the calm of someone who'd already rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Under oath, she took the seat. "Carver," Rachel began, voice soft but sharp, "you were the director of finance for the People First Foundation. You worked directly under Mr. Johnson for 3 years, correct?" "Yes." "Did he ever instruct you to hide or mislabel expenses?" Jasmine hesitated. A half-second too long. "No," she said. A murmur stirred. Rachel raised her eyebrow. "But did he ever approve suspicious expenses without asking questions?" Jasmine looked at Dwayne. "Yes. Frequently." Rachel paced slowly like a lioness circling prey. "Why do you think that was?" Jasmine swallowed. "He trusted us. Sometimes too much. But the truth is, I don't think he read half of what crossed his desk." The statement hit hard. Dwayne didn't react, but his lawyer scribbled furiously. The jurors looked down, processing. Rachel didn't stop. Can you tell the court if Mr. Johnson personally approved the payment of $275,000 to Lux Travel Incorporated? Yes, Jasmine said. I flagged it. He said, run it through if it's urgent. And it was processed. And that payment had no documentation justifying the expense? None that I ever saw. Judge Reeves leaned forward. Is this in the discovery packet? It is now, Rachel replied, handing over a fresh copy of the audit log. Dwayne's attorney objected. Your Honor, this is a surprise witness and newly introduced evidence. This is highly irregular. Reeves considered it. Overruled. But proceed carefully, Kim. Rachel turned to Jasmine again. One last question. Did you believe Mr. Johnson was guilty of fraud? Jasmine looked down, exhaled slowly, then looked at Dwayne. No, she said. I believe he was guilty of trusting the wrong people. A hush settled. Judge Reeves scribbled a note. Rachel stepped back, folding her arms. No further questions. Dwayne's defense team declined to cross-examine. And for the first time since the trial began, the courtroom was suspended in a different kind of silence. One born not from doubt, but from the terrifying gray area between negligence and innocence. The jury felt it. So did the world watching. The media outside had already christened the trial as the trial of trust. But inside Courtroom 3B, things were shifting beneath the surface. Subtly, yet irrevocably. Rachel Kim sat quietly now, fingers laced, eyes sharp. She had played her move. But every good prosecutor knew that truth wasn't enough. It had to resonate. The real fight was in the perception. Dwayne Johnson's legal team finally responded. Your Honor, said Veronica Nash, the lead defense attorney, rising slowly, we call Alan Timmons to the stand. Alan Timmons, former CFO of the People First Foundation. A man whose sudden resignation 3 months before the scandal broke had raised more questions than answers. And until now he'd been a ghost, unreachable, unheard, unbothered. The courtroom shifted as Alan entered. Mid-50s, pale, sweat already beating at his temple. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like a man walking to the gallows. He swore in voice barely audible. Veronica approached calmly. Mr. Timmons, let's get straight to it. Why did you resign from the foundation? Alan fidgeted. Burnout. Isn't it true you received a $90,000 severance bonus upon your departure? Yes. Rachel leaned forward. That number had never surfaced in discovery. And did that bonus come from discretionary funds? Funds only accessible by Mr. Johnson and one other signatory? A long pause. Yes. Who was the other signatory? Alan stared ahead. Me. Did Mr. Johnson instruct you to process that payment? Alan blinked, then shook his head. No. I processed it myself. The jury shifted, eyes darting between Dwayne and Alan. Did Mr. Johnson even know? I don't believe so. Veronica paced. So you're saying that one of the most controversial payments in this investigation was executed without Dwayne Johnson's knowledge? Yes. And you resigned before it could be flagged? Yes. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Reeves adjusted in his seat, suddenly more attentive. Veronica turned to the jury. No further questions. Rachel stood immediately. Redirect, Your Honor. Granted. She walked up to Alan, slow and surgical. Mr. Timmons, when you issued that $90,000 payment to yourself, did you falsify documentation to make it look routine? Alan hesitated. Yes. Did you lie about the source of the funds in internal audits? Yes. Rachel's voice sharpened. And did Mr. Johnson ever question you? Did he ever review that transaction? No. He didn't. She leaned in. So is it your testimony that the CEO of a multimillion-dollar charity organization never once checked financial statements signed in his name? Yes. Gasps again. Not because of guilt, but because of the idea, terrifying, absurd, that negligence on that scale might be real. Rachel turned to the jury. Thank you. She sat down. And in that moment, a strange shift occurred. Not in the facts, but in the collective gut of the courtroom. Dwayne Johnson wasn't being painted as a criminal anymore. He was being painted as something potentially worse. Careless. Hazards of hero worship. The courtroom felt colder now, like a window had been cracked open in the soul of the case. A silence clung to the air, not from boredom or fatigue but from deep, unsettling doubt. Dwayne Johnson sat unmoving at the defense table. For the first time in the entire trial he looked shaken, not angry, not defensive, but disturbed. He had heard the numbers, seen the documents, rehearsed the strategy. But hearing Alan Timmons say it out loud was something else entirely. Judge Reeves cleared his throat. Defense may call its next witness. Veronica Nash stood but didn't look at the jury. Instead, she looked at Dwayne. We call Mr. Dwayne Johnson to the stand. Rachel didn't flinch. She had anticipated this move. In fact, she had prayed for it. As he walked toward the witness box, every lens in the room turned. Cameras clicked like hissing snakes. The man who had played gods, heroes, and titans was about to do something harder than any role: answer for himself. After swearing in, he looked at the jury, not with charm, not with his trademark grin, but with the composed humility of a man who understood what was at stake. Veronica began, Mr. Johnson, how would you describe your role at the People First Foundation? He nodded slowly. I was the face, the fundraiser, the motivator. I believed in the mission. Were you involved in daily financial oversight? No, he admitted. That was Alan's domain. I trusted him. Do you acknowledge now that trust may have been misplaced? Pause. Yes. Some heads in the jury nodded. That single word, yes, landed with an authenticity that data and spreadsheets couldn't replicate. Did you ever sign documents without reading them? I did, he said plainly. Too often. Rachel scribbled a note but kept her expression neutral. Veronica pressed further. Do you believe you failed your organization? He nodded again, slower this time. Yes. I failed by not watching closely enough. I failed by letting admiration turn into autopilot. That's on me. Gasps weren't needed now. Just silence, and it returned, dense and thoughtful. No further questions. Judge Reeves turned to Rachel. Cross. Rachel stood. Mr. Johnson, you're known for discipline, correct? I try to be. You train for hours a day. Memorize scripts, control your brand. Why didn't that same discipline apply to your nonprofit? He swallowed. I saw them as separate worlds. But your name was on every check. Yes. So when children lost access to medicine, when food programs were shut down, your name was still there? His voice dropped. Yes. Even if you didn't steal a dime, can you deny your fingerprints are all over the collapse? No. I can't. Rachel didn't gloat. She didn't hammer him. She didn't need to. She simply let the weight of his own confession hang there, honest, haunting, human. She turned to the jury, voice even. That'll be all. Dwayne stepped down. No longer the man who had been accused. Now, something much more complicated. A symbol of what happens when charisma forgets accountability. By now, the trial had outgrown its headlines. The courtroom was no longer just a theater for the public. It had become a crucible of truth, where even icons melted under scrutiny. Judge Reeves called for a brief recess after Dwayne Johnson's testimony, allowing everyone, jury, press, spectators, to process what had just unfolded. Rachel Caden didn't leave the courtroom. She stood alone at the prosecution table, hands on the wood, eyes locked on the jury. Her mind wasn't wandering. It was assembling. When the judge returned and the court reconvened, Rachel rose. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to recall a witness. The room stirred. This was rare. Proceed, said Judge Reeves, leaning forward. Rachel called, the court recalls Alan Timmons to the stand. A low buzz rippled through the gallery. Alan, the former CFO, had already testified, confident, detached, playing the numbers man with the dispassion of a spreadsheet. But Rachel wasn't done with him. He returned to the stand, this time with a twitch in his left eye. He hadn't expected this. That was clear. Rachel approached with the precision of a chess master nearing checkmate. Mr. Timmons, earlier you testified that all expenditures were authorized by Mr. Johnson, correct? Yes. And that he signed off on every financial decision? Yes. She held up a document, an internal email chain. Do you recognize this correspondence? His throat moved. I do. Please read the highlighted section aloud. Alan's voice cracked slightly. We'll route the discretionary funds through PR to avoid audit flags. Dwayne doesn't need to know the details. Gasps broke the room's composure. Judge Reeves raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The courtroom wasn't just listening now, it was leaning in. Rachel walked slowly in front of the jury. So you routed money, without his knowledge, through channels meant to avoid accountability? Alan shifted. It was standard practice. She cut him off. Not what I asked. Did he know? No, he said. He trusted me. Rachel stepped closer. And what did you do with those funds? Reallocations, bonuses, travel. For yourself. He looked down. Yes. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution would like to introduce this document as People's Exhibit 47. Admitted, said Judge Reeves. Rachel faced the jury once more. So, to be clear, while Dwayne Johnson was raising money and making speeches, you were siphoning funds, obscuring trails, and using his signature as a shield? Alan said nothing. Did he ever once ask you to do that? No. Did he ever benefit personally from your theft? No. She paused, letting the room absorb it. No further questions. As Alan stepped down, shoulders slumped, the narrative began to shift. Not away from accountability, but toward complexity. Toward the truth that guilt can wear many faces, and not all of them are the ones in front of the camera. Rachel sat back down, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. The move had been bold, tactical, and it had cracked something fundamental in the case's architecture. Now the final act loomed, not a battle of facts but of interpretation. Outside the courtroom, the world wasn't standing still. Every update, every cross-examination, every emotion was broadcast live across news tickers and social media feeds. But after Rachel Caden exposed Alan Timmons' betrayal in court, the narrative shifted, and it happened fast. #JusticeForDJ began trending. Memes appeared showing Dwayne Johnson looking bewildered beside headlines about financial manipulation. TikTokers dissected his stunned silence. Influencers posted clips of the moment Alan admitted he'd rerouted funds without Dwayne's knowledge. Suddenly, Dwayne wasn't just a defendant, he was a possible victim. Inside the courtroom the next day, Judge Reeves entered with her usual gravitas. But the energy had changed. The spectators weren't here to see a celebrity fall. They were here to see if the system could still distinguish between being powerful and being responsible. The prosecution finished its case with a careful closing arc, acknowledging Dwayne's influence but emphasizing his role as the public face of a dishonest campaign. But it was the defense's turn now. Samantha Brayton stood calmly as she addressed the jury. You've heard the arguments, she said. You've seen the documents, the headlines, the accusations. But there's something you haven't seen, a single shred of evidence that Dwayne Johnson personally profited from fraud. She clicked a remote. Screens lit up with messages Dwayne had sent to Alan. They were boring, dry, precise. No mention of hidden funds. No cryptic commands. Samantha leaned into the silence. Dwayne Johnson raised money. He made speeches. He appeared at events. And he trusted the people around him to do their jobs ethically. That trust was broken, but not by him. Then she took a risk. She turned to Dwayne. Mr. Johnson, did you ever suspect your campaign team was misappropriating funds? No, he said simply. And when you found out? I ordered a full audit and resigned. The courtroom was still. Samantha faced the jury once more. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about doing the right thing when the truth comes out. She paused. He's done that. And now it's your turn. When she sat, Dwayne looked over to his family. His daughter gave a faint nod, her expression unreadable. The judge called a recess. Outside, the press was ablaze. Some anchors still framed Dwayne as careless. Others called him America's most honest scapegoat. Editorials emerged debating whether ignorance was a defense or an indictment. But one thing was certain, the tide had turned. Not in a landslide but in a way that could change everything. And as the jury prepared to deliberate, it wasn't clear if they were judging a crime or a culture. The jury was composed of 12 citizens. Different ages, different races, different politics. But now, for the first time, they were tethered to one unshakable question. Was Dwayne Johnson guilty? As the deliberation room door closed behind them, the weight of the case sank into the walls like humidity. The foreperson, a middle-aged school principal named Darla, spoke first. All right. We know, the judge said, beyond reasonable doubt. So let's start with this. Does anyone believe Dwayne knowingly participated in the fraud? Silence. Then a hand went up. A man in his 60s, Ed, who ran a local print shop. I'm not sure, he said. I don't think he's a bad guy. But it's hard for me to believe he didn't know anything. I mean, millions were moved around. Another juror, a nurse named Alina, replied, but isn't that the point? There's no proof he knew. And Rachel's testimony, she risked everything to tell the truth. Why would she lie for him? The room fractured into two camps. Those who believed Dwayne was too smart not to know, and those who believed Alan Timmons orchestrated the entire scheme under the cover of Dwayne's name. It wasn't an easy discussion. Some jurors were swayed by emotion, especially the young woman who confessed she'd grown up idolizing Dwayne. Others refused to let admiration cloud judgment. They rewatched the footage. They reviewed the financial trail. They debated the ethics of leadership, the meaning of trust, and whether public figures deserved leniency or stricter accountability. Darla asked them to vote just to see where they stood. Hands went up, 6 guilty, 6 not guilty. Deadlock. Hours passed. Arguments escalated. At one point Ed shouted, "Intent matters," while Alina countered, "So does justice." But then an older woman named Joy, who hadn't spoken much, cleared her throat. "You all keep talking about what Dwayne should have known," she said. "But the law doesn't punish people for not being perfect. It punishes them for what they do. And as far as I can tell, he didn't do anything criminal." That shifted something. They paused. Considered. By the 7th hour the vote changed. 8 not guilty, 4 guilty. Then 9-3. Then 11-1. The last holdout, Ed, stared at the printed emails again. No code. No secret signals. Just plain business talk. He sighed. "Okay. I'm there." When they knocked on the door to return their verdict, the courtroom filled with silence. Dwayne sat between his lawyers, back straight, lips pressed together. Rachel was in the second row, fingers clenched. Judge Felicia Reeves re-entered, adjusted her glasses, and nodded to the foreperson. The clerk asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "And how do you find the defendant, Mr. Dwayne Johnson?" Darla took a breath. "We find the defendant not guilty on all counts." There was no eruption. Just stunned quiet. Dwayne blinked. Rachel let out a shaky breath. Even Judge Reeves, always composed, paused for half a second before saying, "The court thanks the jury for its service." Outside, the world didn't yet know. But inside that courtroom the legend had shifted. The courtroom had emptied, but the echo of Rachel's final words still lingered in every corner. Outside, the steps of the federal courthouse were bathed in afternoon sun, and crowded. Reporters swarmed, cameras buzzed, and microphones jutted toward Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson like spears of curiosity. He stood behind a wooden podium hastily arranged by his legal team. Gone was the smug grin he once wore in interviews. In its place was a quiet intensity, measured, calm, and unfamiliar. "I know what you're all expecting me to say," he began, adjusting the single-page statement in his hand. "But for once, I don't want to read what's written. I want to speak as a man who just got humbled." The press fell into a tense silence. "I thought power meant control. I thought influence meant immunity. And I was wrong." Inside the courthouse lobby, Rachel stood behind the tinted glass, watching. Not hiding. Just watching. She wore no expression of triumph. Only exhaustion. Maybe relief. Dwayne's voice cracked slightly. "The truth she brought forward, it's bigger than this courtroom. It's bigger than me. And I hope the world listens even if I didn't when it mattered most." A few journalists glanced at each other. This wasn't damage control. This was something else. He stepped away from the podium without taking questions, nodding respectfully to the cameras. He didn't look back. Across the street, someone had painted in bold white letters on the asphalt, "Truth doesn't need a crown." Later that evening the internet erupted. Video clips of Rachel's courtroom revelation were everywhere. Edited with dramatic music, slowed down, captioned in multiple languages. TikToks were already stitching her silent moments with protest footage. Reddit exploded with conspiracy theories. Twitter, no X, saw the hashtag Rachel Speaks trending worldwide. But Rachel didn't post anything. She didn't grant interviews. She disappeared. Gone from her apartment. Her desk at the agency empty. No statement, no forwarding address. Only a quote emailed to one journalist she trusted. "I didn't do it to be famous. I did it so silence wouldn't win again." Meanwhile, Judge Tanya Chutkan received threats. Support. Criticism. Praise. All in equal measure. But she didn't blink. She issued a single sharp statement. Justice is not about who shouts loudest. It is about who endures when truth becomes inconvenient. A short documentary was already being pitched by HBO. The Rock vs. The Truth became a working title. And somewhere, on a bench in a different city, Rachel sat with her face turned to the wind, reading no headlines, holding no regrets. Because for the first time in years she was free. 2 weeks had passed since the verdict, and yet the world had not moved on. Rachel's silence had turned into a cultural roar. University campuses debated her case in ethics seminars. Protesters carried placards bearing her image beside the word truth. And an independent news outlet dubbed her the face of quiet justice. But for Rachel, all of that was noise. In a small coastal town with no reporters and no recognition, she had taken refuge in a bed and breakfast run by a retired librarian and her 3 cats. Her days were silent: books, long walks, and avoiding the internet. Not out of fear, but because she wanted to remember who she was before the world knew her name. The only connection to her past was a burner phone she barely checked. Until one night it buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. "He wants to see you. No cameras. Just closure." Attached was a Google Maps pin, Washington, D.C., 1 week from now. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't need to ask who he was. Dwayne. The man whose empire she had shattered. The man who had once made her invisible. She could have ignored it. She had every reason to. But closure, that word weighed heavily. Not for him. For herself. 1 week later, inside a small, private chamber within the National Archives building, far from the public eye, Rachel and Dwayne sat facing each other. No lawyers. No press. No microphones. Just a single guard standing outside. Dwayne looked older. Or maybe it was the guilt that had aged him. "I didn't expect you to come," he said, voice low. "I didn't come for you," Rachel replied. "I came for peace." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." A moment of silence stretched between them. "You know," he began again, "I spent years surrounding myself with people who clapped no matter what I said. I forgot what truth sounded like." Rachel didn't flinch. "Truth sounds different when it's inconvenient." He smiled faintly. "It sounds like you." For the first time, Rachel allowed a small smile to break her guarded expression. Not approval. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. "I'm not here to make peace with you, Dwayne. But I'm glad you're starting to make peace with yourself." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "It's for you. Not to publish. Just to keep. I wrote it before the trial ended. Back when I thought I could still win." She took it silently. As she turned to leave, Dwayne's voice stopped her one last time. "Rachel, if I had listened sooner?" She cut him off gently. "But you didn't." And with that, she stepped through the door into the hall, into the world, lighter than when she had entered. She didn't open the letter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she had it. And in that there was power. The hall was quiet. Rachel stepped into the sun, her coat pulled tight against the wind. She was no longer the woman who had first walked into that courtroom, trembling and uncertain. She was someone else now, wiser, heavier, and lighter all at once. Outside the archives building, a single reporter waited. He didn't shout her name. He didn't rush forward with a microphone. He simply raised his camera and she gave a small, measured nod, permission granted. A single flash. One image. No statement. No soundbite. Just a look. And then she walked on. The world had changed in her absence. In San Francisco, tech workers protested unethical data practices by walking out of their offices at noon every Friday. The Rachel Walkout, they called it. In Europe, legislation was introduced inspired by the case, protecting digital privacy and whistleblowers with the so-called Wren Clause. And in the courtroom where it all started, Judge Beverly Crane presided over a new case, her gavel falling with a little more caution, a little more humanity. Rachel never returned to her old job. She didn't join a speaking circuit. She refused book deals, documentaries, and brand partnerships. She lived instead with intention. She opened a small bookstore by the sea. Its name, Unspoken. Inside there were no signed headshots, no celebrity photos. Just books. Just silence. And a little bell that chimed when someone opened the door. People came from everywhere, not to meet Rachel Wren, but to sit in a place that had been built by someone who understood the weight of truth. Sometimes she helped them find a book. Sometimes she just listened. And sometimes when they asked, "Are you really her?" she smiled and said, "I was once." But in a hidden drawer beneath the register, wrapped in soft linen, was Dwayne's unopened letter. Not for revenge. Not for regret. But to remember. To never forget how close the world came to silencing her, and how she whispered back. Justice hadn't come with fireworks or fanfare. It had come in silence. And the silence echoed everywhere.